Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Dear students, Assalamu alaikum and welcome back in lecture number 23. Today we are going to discuss the underlying risk in Islamic financial modes. We have discussed few modes of Islamic financing like Musharaka, Mudarba, Murabaha, Salam, Istisna and Ijara. And for each mode of financing, there are certain risks. So today we are going to discuss those risks in this lecture, and this lecture will consist in two parts. First part we will be discussing in this lecture, and the second part we will discuss in the next lecture. And before we go into details of this lecture, let me remind you the previous lecture, and we will go into little more detail of that lecture because it needs a little more revision. So in our previous lecture we discussed some popular sukuk like Salam, Istisna, Murabaha and Ijara sukuk. They were discussed in previous to that lecture. And also we discussed the sukuk growth, that what is the growth phenomena in the world, how the sukuks are coming popular in all around the world, and their growth was quite exponential. And only in the year 2007 or in 2008 there was a decrease in the sukuk expansion, and after that it picked up again, and the sukuks, they were one of the most popular modes to raise or to arrange funds. And also there are different controversies because scholars, they don't agree 100% on the different operations of this sukuk, because one group of scholars, they have their own view, the others, they have their own view, and this difference in the opinion is creating certain problems for the users, for the clients and for the bankers as well. And also we discussed a little difference between sukuk and bonds. So before we discuss our today's lecture, let me remind you some important slides from our previous lecture, that sukuk versus conventional bond. So we have certain similarities and differences, but if we look at the actual practice, you may not find much difference, and that we discuss in the later slides. So actually the sukuks, they are the replica of bonds. When you look at the financing mix of the financial organizations, any business, a corporation, they have their financing through equity and debt. So bond is a kind of loan upon which the issuing company, they pay interest on regular intervals, maybe every month, every 3 months, every 6 months and every year, but most common practice is that every 6 months. So the level of debt in the total financing mix, or the percentage of debt in total financing mix, we know it as a leverage. So the debt proportion means the companies, the businesses, they have to pay interest expense against that. But in case of equities, the businesses, they have to pay dividend against that. But both of these expenses, the interest expense in case of debt and dividend expense in case of equities, they have their own characteristics. For example, interest is a tax deductible expense. So before paying tax, the companies, they can deduct interest expense out of their net income. But in case of dividends, the dividends should be paid after deduction of tax. So to gain some tax benefits, companies, they prefer to have some financing using debt modes of financing like bonds. So bond is one of the popular securities which are used to raise funds, and it is a debt mode of financing. But under Islamic financial system, the companies, the businesses, they are not allowed to issue securities or the debt securities and then to pay interest on it. So there was a huge demand for some security which is Sharia compliant as well. So the sukuk were devised at that time, and sukuks, they substitute the bond into the total financing mix. And in case of sukuk, they are not loan-based or a debt-based security. They are actually asset-based securities, which makes it Sharia compliant. And the dealing of that, the purchase of that is through the financing of those sukuks, and then the returns that the asset is earning, those returns are distributed among the sukuk holders. So this is the ideal situation. And then when the sukuks are redeemed, they should be redeemed ideally with the market value or the exercise price of that asset, which is the underlying asset of this whole transaction. So with that market value, all the Skook holders, they are proportionately compensated. And then there are certain differences that Skooks, they are also redeemed at their face value at the time of maturity, maybe for after 5, 6, 7 or 8, 9, 10 years. When the Skooks time period finishes, at that time Skooks are redeemed at their face value. And on the other hand, bonds are also redeemed on their face value. So these things, they create some confusion among the users. So before we discuss these details, let me remind you the differences between Skook and conventional bond. Income is generated from assets. So from the Skooks, certain asset is purchased and that asset would earn something. It may be used to lease out, and the rental income will be the income. It may be used for some manufacturing purpose or for some trading purpose, and the profit will be generated out of it, and that profit is distributed among the Skook holders. And on the other hand, income is derived from the debt instrument. That is, it is a loan. A bond is a loan, and in that case, there is an interest after every regular time period. And in case of Skook, returns is expected from the investments made into different assets. And then in case of bond, the return is fixed and it is predetermined at the time of purchase or investment into that particular security. And the negotiability of the Skook is restricted to specific type of Skook, because Skooks, they are of different nature, and according to rules of Islamic financial system, all the securities which carry more than 50% representation of the tangible assets can be traded into the secondary market. So we have Skooks, Skooks al-Ijara, then Skook al-Murabaha, Skook al-Musharaka and Mudarba. So where, for example, in the case of Skook al-Murabaha, the funds raised through issuing of these Skook certificates, they were used to purchase an asset and then to sell it in the market to a third party or maybe to the originator of that Skook transaction. And now what the Skook fund has is only a claim, that is the claim against the sale of that asset. Now the Skook fund is going to receive only installments with profit, and then these Skook certificates, now they represent only claims. So these Skook certificates are not tradable in the market. Whereas in case of Ijara Skook, an asset is purchased, now the Skook fund is the owner of that asset, and that asset is leased out, and the rental incomes, they are the profits or the income of that fund. So here the Skook certificates, they represent a partial ownership into that asset. Now these certificates, they represent an asset. Now they can be sold into the in the market like any other security, maybe the shares or bonds or any other security. And where there is a mix of different kind of financing like Skook al-Musharaka, Skook al-Mudarba, commodity Skooks, and different kind of Skooks are there. So in that case, if the total assets, they are more than 50% of the fund, or the total assets, tangible assets, they are more than 50%. So in that case again, the Skook certificates can be traded in the market. Whereas the bonds, they are always negotiable in the secondary market. But the pricing of the bond depends upon the interest rate on it. For example, the interest rate on the bond certificate has been written as 10%, and the interest rate in the banks, it is suppose 12% for deposits. Now the investors into the bond securities, they are earning only 10%, whereas banks are offering 12%. So in that case, the bond holders, they will sell their bonds, they will sell these securities into the secondary market, and they will take their savings or they will take their investment into deposits of different banks to earn a 2% more interest rate. So in that case, when more and more bonds, they are available into the market, so their price will decline. And on the other hand, if the banks, they are offering interest rate less than the bond rate, suppose 8%, so in that case, more and more buyers will tend to purchase bonds. So in that case, the price of bonds may appreciate. So this paper is negotiable, and the appreciation and depreciation into the price would depend on different factors. And the interest rates into the economy, they have a role in the price determination of these securities. And the fourth difference is that Sukuk issuers, they are in fact the sellers of the assets. They raise funds from the Sukuk, this activity. They sell the Sukuk certificates using the special purpose vehicle. They establish a company, and that company raises funds, and they purchase the asset from the originator. And then that asset is sold back to the originator, or maybe it is leased back to the originator. And different mechanisms, they are possible there. So the Sukuk issuers, normally they are the sellers of the asset. But in case of bond issuer is a borrower. So the bond issuer is simply borrowing loans. There is a relationship of lender and borrower with certain conditions mentioned in the prospectus. And the Sukuk holder is an owner of the asset. So the asset which is purchased with the Sukuk funds, the Sukuk holders are the owners of that asset. The Sukuk certificates, they represent the ownership. For example, if a person is having 10% of the total Sukuk issue, so in that case, that person is owner of 10% into that asset. Whereas bondholder is simply a lender which has given a loan to the bond issuer. And the seller, there is a relationship between the Sukuk holder and the originator as of seller and buyer. Whereas in case of bonds, there is a relationship of lender and borrower. And at the seventh point, business risk return relationship is there in case of Sukuks. So the whatever business is conducted, whatever profits are generated with that asset, those returns, they are shared among the Sukuk holders. And then in case of conventional bond, issuer guarantees the payment of face value and periodic interest. So the issuer provides the guarantee to pay the periodic interest payments, and at the end of the time period, they would redeem the security at its face value. So in case of Sukuk, the risk is with the underlying asset. So if the asset loses its value, there is a risk, and the Sukuk holders will accordingly lose their value. This is the ideal condition. But again, there is a confusion here, there is a controversy here, that even in case of losing the asset's value, the Sukuks, they are redeemed at their face value because a third party provides the guarantee. And unfortunately, that third party is again the originator. Whereas in case of conventional bond, major risk is with the issuer, or the credit risk is there. The issuer has all the risk. If the issuer goes default, the bondholders, they may not be able to liquidate their security. And then return is expected from the underlying assets. So from the Sukuk funds, the assets are purchased, and the activities or the business activities are conducted with that asset, and the returns are generated, and those returns, they are distributed among the Sukuk holders. Whereas interest payment is an obligation on the bond issuer. So it is a responsibility or obligation of a bond issuer that he or she or that company must pay the interest, and then at the end redeem these securities at their face value. And the return of investors' capital cannot be guaranteed in case of Sukuk. Ideally, in case of Sukuk, the return cannot be guaranteed. It may not be mentioned, it cannot be mentioned that 10% return must be paid to each Sukuk holder. Whereas the returns can vary. There might be negative returns, there might be positive returns, and it may not be fixed. And in case of bond, issuer is obligated to return investors' capital at its face value. In case of any losses or damages to the capital assets of the issuer, they have nothing to do with the face value of that bond. These bond securities must be redeemed at their face value. Now let me remind you some of the controversies in the Sukuk. And first of all, Sukuk al-Musharaka. There are some Sharia boards which think that Sukuk al-Musharaka is completely allowed, and they approve the structure or allow their respective institution to invest such business deals. Others have prevented institutions under their respective supervision to invest into such Sukuks, viewing them Sharia non-compliant. So there is difference in point of view. There are Sharia boards for each and every Islamic banks, And some of the Sharia boards, they allow their respective banks to invest into Sukuk al-Musharaka, and others they don't allow because they think this is not Sharia compliant. And also Mufti Taqi Usmani, he has declared that in UAE, about 80% of the Sukuk issuances, they are not Sharia compliant. So there are a lot of confusion about these certificates. And disagreement arises on the permissibility for one of the Musharaka partners to give an undertaking to purchase the share or units of the second partner of the Musharaka contract at the maturity of the Sukuk at the face value and predetermined price. So as I explained the Sukuk al-Musharaka in our previous lecture, Sukuk al-Musharaka is actually the Musharaka or partnership contract between the company which serves the purpose of a special purpose vehicle, and then that company sells the Sukuk certificates to the investors and receives the cash proceeds. So with that cash or with that capital, it becomes partner with the originator or maybe any other party. So that in that case, the originator provides the guarantee that at the end of the business, whatever is the value of the assets, the Sukuk certificates will be redeemed at their face value. So this provision of guarantee before, even 4 or 5 years before the maturity of these Sukuks, it is doubtful. So the people, they have their doubts with such type of assurance or such type of promise. So in this slide, you can see the total operation of Sukuk al-Musharaka. So an SPV is created which issues Sukuk certificates. And SPV is a mechanism, in fact, that a company is established by the originator, and that company serves as a special purpose vehicle to help to complete that transaction. This company will sell the Sukuk certificates to the investors and will receive the funds, and then these funds are utilized in the respective Sukuk which is mentioned in the prospectus. So the originator will establish that company. It is a separate legal entity. It has its own rights, its own liabilities, and then this company sell the Sukuk certificates at the first place to the investors. The investors can be banks, can be businesses, corporations, or the investment making funds, and then at the second step, the cash is paid as a price of these Sukuk certificates, and at the third step, a Musharaka agreement takes place between the originator and the special purpose vehicle, between that company, this company. So here, at the third place, cash is contributed as capital into the Musharaka contract, and then originator also contributes the cash, because in Musharaka contract, all the partners, they bring their capital. So issuer or this SPV is one of the partners, and then originator is the other partner. Originator also contributes the cash or the monetary resources into the Musharaka. And then at the fifth place, share of profit and loss. Profits and losses, they are shared according to the operations of this Musharaka business. And then share of profit and loss of the partners, they are also distributed. And at the seventh place, there is periodic distribution of amounts. When the special purpose vehicle, when this company receives its share of profit or loss, those profits or losses, they are distributed among the investors according to their proportionate ownership into the Sukuks. And then at the eighth place, sale of Musharaka unit. When the Musharaka contract is completed, and at the end of that Musharaka contract, the originator purchases the Musharaka assets. So at the eighth place, the originator as obliger under purchase undertaking and under sale undertaking will purchase the assets of Musharaka, and a price will be paid to the SPV, and that price will be distributed among the investors according to the Sukuk holders, according to the number of Sukuks each person is having, and proportionately it will be distributed among the Sukuk holders. And then at the 11th step, when the Sukuk holders, when the Sukuk certificates, they are redeemed, now the investors, they have nothing to do with that business. Now the step is to dissolve that SPV, and SPV would appoint the originator as the managing agent, and as an incentive, a fee will also be paid to the originator. So you can see here the originator has different roles into this one contract. Originator is the one who established this SPV, then originator is the partner, and then originator purchase the assets of Musharka, and then finally originator becomes the owner of these assets and will manage the business which is developed or which was established through this whole activity. And at the same time, the originator provides a guarantee, the same originator provides a guarantee to the Sukuk holders that the Sukuk certificates will be redeemed at the face value. So this is a point of confusion. When a surety is provided to the Sukuk holders, that Sukuk holders unit in the ownership will have the same price as at the time of starting of that business. So with the passage of time, assets value may increase or it may decrease, but the assets, they are purchased at their face value as they were initially in the starting of that Musharka contract. So this is a point of confusion, which because of that, some of the Sharia boards, they advise their banks not to invest into this type of Sukuks, and some of the Sharia boards, they think this is allowed, and they allow their respective banks to invest into such type of Sukuks. Now let me show you the Ijara Sukuk structure, and there are more confusions and more controversies. And you can see here in the blue the originator, 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 and originator. Originator has lot of roles here, and there are more controversies than even in Sukuk al-Musharaka. So first of all, the originator establishes a special purpose vehicle. Just let me remind you the example of WAPDA. When the WAPDA established a special purpose vehicle, it was a company which was named as First WAPDA Sukuk Company. So that company actually served a special purpose vehicle. So again here, the originator will establish an SPV, the special purpose vehicle company, and that company will sell the Sukuk certificates to the investors or the Sukuk holders, and the Sukuk holders will pay the price for that. And then as a third place, this company, the originator, now keep in mind the same originator sells the asset to the SPV. The ownership of the asset is transferred to that SPV. Now SPV has become the owner on behalf of all these investors, and then that same asset is leased, and then price is paid for that asset which is purchased by SPV at the fourth step, and then at the fifth step, the asset which was owned by the SPV, now there is a lease agreement between the same originator and the SPV. Now the assets are leased to the originator, and the rentals, they flow back towards the SPV. Now the SPV appoints the originator as the servicing agent as well for that asset. Now that the originator has all the rights or is given the right to service all this type of assets. And at the eighth place, all the rentals which are received from the originator because of the use of that asset, they are distributed among the Sukuk holders. And at the ninth step, when at the end of that lease agreement, now that asset which is owned by the SPV is purchased again by the originator, and a price is paid back to the SPV, and that price is paid back towards the investors. Now the Sukuk certificates, they are redeemed with that. Now you can see here originator, 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 and originator. Originator is the one who established that SPV at the first place, and then originator sold its own asset to this SPV, and then originator entered into a lease agreement with this SPV, and then originator is appointed as the service agent in this contract, and then again owner is the originator will purchase back the same asset. And at the same time, there is an other guarantee which is provided by the originator that the Sukuk will be liquidated, the Sukuk certificates will be redeemed at their face value. Now there are so many confusions here. The same originator and so many contracts. Whereas we see in the Islamic financial system the Sharia says that for one subject matter there cannot be two contracts. But here we see so many contracts based on assumptions that the originator is a third party. First of all, originator created an SPV, and SPV as a separate legal entity, and the originator and SPV will be treated as separately. Now these are two different entities, but actually the originator established it. And at the second place, the originator will sell his or its asset to the SPV and receives the cash proceeds. And then for the same asset, the same originator will use it with the lease agreement, and after the lease agreement finishes, the same originator will purchase that asset, and at the end, when the Skook certificates are redeemed, the originator provides the guarantee as a third party that Skook certificates will be redeemed at their face value. So there are confusions. So let's see in the forthcoming slides that now let's see what are the confusions, what are the criticisms against this Ijara contract. So first of all, guarantee in the Skook issuance, that a third party who is normally the originator of the Skook provides a guarantee for the principal capital of the Skook. Now the capital contribution is provided a guarantee that it will not lose its value, which is against the rules of Sharia. The originator benefiting from the Skook proceeds establishes a special purpose vehicle that issues the Skook while the originator stands by to provide a guarantee against any shortfall. The first collective resolution was issued by the Islamic Fiqh Academy. They said that there is no Sharia objection to mention in the prospectus of the issue or in the documents of Skook the promise of a third party who is independent personally and in terms of financial ability from the two parties to the contract. It's a long resolution, but the relevant one I just quoted here, that there is no problem if the third party is an independent party and it has no liabilities against any of the Skook holders, the SPV or the asset. So in that case, that third party can provide the guarantee that the investor's capital will remain intact and there will be no losses for the investors. So whereas the Accounting and Auditing Organization of Islamic Financial Institutions, they devise some Sharia standards, and in their Sharia standard number 17 on investment in Skooks, they say that the prospectus must not include any statement to the effect that issuer of the certificates accepts the liability to compensate the owner for the certificates up to the nominal value of the certificates or up to the face value in situations other than the torts or negligence, nor that he guarantees a fixed percentage of profit. So here the face value cannot be guaranteed by the issuer of the Skook certificates, but in case of any negligence or any misconduct, those losses can be compensated out of the issuer. And also fixed percentage of profit cannot be mentioned, but in practice the Skook certificates, just like the bond certificates, in their offer summary they have a rate which is normally known as the rental rate or the profit or return. And then it further states, it is however permitted to an independent third party to provide a guarantee free of charge. Now a third party, which we have already discussed in our previous lecture, that governments, they sometimes, to encourage the investments, they can provide such guarantees to the entrepreneurs that you start the businesses, and in case of losses, the capital loss will be recovered and it will be paid by the government. So such type of guarantees can be given by the third party, which is not a stakeholder here. Whereas guaranteeing of capital is prohibited by all school of Islamic law. The capital should not be guaranteed, as we have discussed in the Musharaka, Mudarba, or different capital provision requirements, that in case of capital contributions, the guaranteeing of capital is not allowed. And even if the third party guarantee is provided by the government should not be allowed to provide such guarantee, because the government is having a trust of the public fund. So whatever is in the treasury of the government is not the ownership of the government, it is a trust of the people, and it should not be exposed to financial risk of someone else's losses of any individual or of any business entity. And the second criticism is the sale and lease back structure, that the originator establish the SPV, then sell the asset to the SPV, and then lease the same asset from the SPV. So this is also questionable. And pricing of the sukuk, Muslim economists and Sharia scholars have not come up with an alternative to the interest rate as a readily available indicator of profitability. Hence they use KIBOR or LIBOR as their benchmark, and in each of their practice, whatever is the asset, whatever is the underlying asset, the rate of return, it may be the rental in case of Ijara sukuk, it may be the profits in case of Musharaka and Mudarba sukuk, or it may be a profit out of the resale of the commodities in case of Murabaha, Salam or Istisna. The rate which has been mentioned into the sukuk certificates, it is same as that of the benchmark which is derived from the conventional system, which is Karachi Interbank Offer Rate or London Interbank Offer Rate in case of Pakistan. So whatever is the underlying asset, the rent is same. For example, the underlying asset is a car, or it may be a house, or it may be any warehouse, or it may be any machinery or equipment or plant, but the rate which is mentioned in the sukuk, it doesn't vary according to the nature of the asset. It is almost same in all these cases. So which makes it doubtful that the bonds, they also carry a fixed interest rate, and then almost the same interest rate with different names is mentioned on the sukuk certificates, and the sukuk certificates, they are also redeemed at their face value, bonds are also redeemed at their face value. Then where is the difference? So these are the doubts, and these are the confusions which are creating bad name for the Islamic banking as well. So the people, the general public, normally they perceive that Islamic banking is simply conversion of the names of the terminologies, but they are operating on the same lines as that of the conventional banks. So further describing the sukuk pricing, however, in practice this return is not at all reflecting the rental of the underlying asset, but the prevalent interest rate, as I mentioned earlier. For example, if there are two real assets which are totally different from each other, then based on market realities, we expect to have different rental income, but actually the same rental income is derived. However, it is observed that same rate of return as reflecting the prevailing interest rate is paid on them if they are used as underlying asset for two different sukuk issues. So the lecture has, I think, more of a revision of the previous lecture, but we have some points to discuss for our today's topic as well. So the learning outcomes for our today's lecture is that now we are going to discuss the risk underlying the financial security, underlying the financial, we are going to discuss the risk in the financial modes like Musharaka, Mudarba, or different financing modes, and the basic concept of risk and its classification into different types. We will discuss it, that what is risk and what are different types of risk and what are the classifications of risk, and also risk faced by financial institutions. What are different types of risk which are being faced by the financial institutions, and you will also be able to understand the uniqueness of risk for the Islamic banks. In case of conventional banks, risk has one nature only, but in case of Islamic banks, the risk varies at different time periods of the product. And risk in Islamic financial instruments, we will discuss that as well, and you will be able to understand that for each of the financial instruments, and then how to mitigate the risk in Islamic financial instruments. These are our today's topics. And first of all, what is risk? Risk is actually existence of uncertainty about the future outcome, and also the difference between the expected and the actual outcome. So these are the risks. We are expecting certain returns, but actually we don't realize that type of returns. We purchase assets hoping that the price will appreciate, but there is a risk that price will depreciate as well. So these are the different expectations and the actual outcomes. So this mechanism of expectations constitutes risk into it. And the uncertainty can be classified as general and specific. So a general uncertainty would mean that ignorance of any potential outcome. For example, after the investment in stocks of a company, the company goes default. The investor invested into the stocks of a company hoping some returns, but the company has had some internal problems and they were not disclosed and nobody knew about that, and that company goes default. So in that case, there is a huge risk. And this risk was not known. This is kind of general risk. And when we can assign certain probabilities to a certain outcome, then that is called the specific risk. For example, if a person hits a ball, the golf ball, from one place to another place, and in between there is a lake, so there is a probability that the ball will fall into that lake. We can assign certain probabilities that if the wind has such and such strength, if the wind is blowing from opposite side, the probability is this much that it will fall into the lake. So this way we can assign specific risk for each outcome. And then in financial terms, we can assign particular specific probabilities. We can calculate some probabilities that depending upon the financial conditions of the company, what are the chances of default. So we can assign such specific risk and we can calculate them, and accordingly for that particular risk we need return from that investment as well. If we have high risk, we expect to have high returns as well. So if you look at this picture, this is a sculpture made of snow. So there is a risk as well. The expected outcome is that the temperature will remain below zero and the sculpture will not melt. But if the temperature goes above zero, which is not an expected outcome, so actually if it goes above zero, then these sculptures can melt down and maybe the visitors will not visit this place and the revenues may not be earned. But if you look the second picture, the sculpture has been melted. So in that case, the risk has been realized. The actual outcome is different from the expected. So the risks are there in each and every step and each and every operation of our life. And further explaining risk, we can measure the risk as well. If we can assign certain probabilities to different outcomes, we can measure the risk as well. And we have different statistical tools to measure the risk from the expected and the actual outcomes. We have different tools like the variance and the standard deviation, or maybe we can use some other tools as well. And the costs involved with higher volatility can lead to bankruptcy. If the actual outcomes are highly volatile, there is high volatility in the expected and the actual outcomes, there is a chances of bankruptcy as well. So the costs, they can be higher in case of higher volatility. And the objectives of risk management are to reduce volatility in the probable outcomes. When we manage the risk, actually we are managing the volatility. We want to reduce the volatility. We want to reduce the variance. We want to decrease the standard deviation and to eliminate costly lower tail outcomes. We don't want to have those results which have their huge cost implications. So we want to avoid those lower tail outcomes. And at the same time, we want to maintain a certain risk profile, because if we don't assume risk, we are not going to get returns. So we must remain in a certain level of risk. So we should maintain a certain risk profile. And the value maximization is the objective of any business. Not only the profit maximization, but the value maximization should be the objective of all the investments. And if we can manage the risk, we can increase the value of the businesses. And further, we can classify the risk into business and financial risk and systematic and unsystematic risk. Business risk, as it is clear that it relates to uncertainty arising from the nature of firm's business. For example, decreased revenues, higher costs, high input costs, and high turnover. And the financial risk relates to the movement in the financial market, maybe the interest rates, the inflation rates, and maybe some other economic conditions into the country. And the systematic and unsystematic risk, they are the controllable and non-controllable risks. The systematic risk is associated with overall market, whereas unsystematic risk is linked to the specific asset of the firm which can be managed. So the systematic risk cannot be managed, it cannot be controlled, but the unsystematic risk can be controlled. So if you see here in this picture, the systematic risk is constant. So along the x-axis, standard deviation of the portfolio return, standard deviation of the return. So we want to have the lesser standard deviation. So in case of systematic risk, we can't reduce it along the portfolio. Even if we keep on investing into different securities of different risk nature, when we increase the portfolio, actually we are reducing the risk, we are managing the risk. But the systematic risk doesn't decrease even if you keep on increasing your portfolio. You keep on investing into different securities, maybe with lower or higher risk, but your systematic risk will remain the same. And factors such as changes in the nation's economy, these are the systematic risks. The nation's income, the economy can have their own path. You cannot control the movement of the economy. As a single firm, the firm cannot control the economy. And then tax reforms by the government. Government is always changing their rules and regulations. So you cannot control the rules and regulations in your favor. So it may be against your business operations, or it may reduce your incomes. So this is a risk you cannot control. Or a change in the world economic situation. For example, the economic crisis, which the world saw in 2007 and 8, and it had its implication after those years. The aftershocks could be felt after many quarters and many years. But these factors we cannot control. As a firm, these are the systematic risks, and also the exchange rate movements, the interest rates, these things the firms cannot control. These are systematic risks. And with these systematic risks, how many risk management techniques you adopt, you cannot decrease the level of risk. You cannot decrease the standard deviation of return. Now, if we look at the unsystematic risk, we can manage that. From a higher standard deviation portfolio return, with the increase in the portfolio, we can decrease the unsystematic risk. So the factors unique to a particular company or industry, for example, the death of a key executive or strike by the employees of the company, these are the things which can be managed. For example, in case of death of the executive, it can be replaced with another executive. In case of strike in the company, it can be negotiated. The solutions can be sorted out. So these are the things, these are the risks that even before they occur, we can manage them. If we can expect them, if there are certain probabilities, so we can manage those risks. So with the increase in the portfolio, we can decrease the deviation into the risk, into the return. Now the risks faced by the financial institutions. What are the different types of risks the financial institutions they face? First of all, market risks. Market risks are the interest rates or the benchmark risk. For example, in case of any securities, a company issued some securities to raise funds, and interest rate which was a benchmark, suppose a 10%, it was stated to be paid for that security, but after that the interest rates fell in the economy. So instead of raising funds from the issuance of that security, there were some other cheaper sources also. So that is also kind of risk. Then the equity price risk. The share price can be higher, can be lower. This is also kind of risk into the market. And asset or commodity price risk. The assets and the commodities price can increase, can decrease. Like the petroleum products, they can be expensive, they can be cheaper. It depends upon the movement of price in the international market. Then there is currency risk. It depends with the exchange rate movement. If it is into your favor, you may earn some profit. If it goes against your investments, you may lose some. You may lose. So in that case, these are the risks available or present into the market. And then there are credit risks. When the organizations or the firms they operate in the market, they have some credit risk as well. In case of trade credit, there is a settlement risk that you may not be able to receive your receivables, and the counterparty risk. The other parties upon which you trust, and with that trust you enter into another contract. So maybe you are going to get some commodity from one of the counterparties and then deliver it to some other party. The counterparty doesn't provide you that commodity. So there are certain risks available also in we can call them as a credit risk. And then there are liquidity risks for the financial institutions. One of the important one, and maybe you are all aware of that, is that when the banks they are not able to pay to the people who want to withdraw cash, so they have a liquidity problem at that time. So if they have enough cash with them, they can entertain all the checks, and if they don't have enough, so there is a liquidity problem with them. So then there are some other natures like funding liquidity risk, that is to meet the liabilities. The organizations, the firms, they may not have enough liquidity with them to meet their day-to-day obligations, to meet their current liabilities even. And then trading liquidity risk also. For your trading activities, the liquidity you need, maybe you are not able to arrange that as well. So that risk is also there. So the funding liquidity actually means that risk that liabilities cannot be met when they fall due and can only be met at an uneconomic price. This is also a risk that. And the second point is that the risk is there that liabilities can only be met at an uneconomic price, maybe higher than the prevailing market price, and the risk is that liabilities can be name specific or systematic. So these are different funding liquidity risks. And there are operational risks. During the operations of the business, there is people risk. For example, the employees turnover. You hire the people in your firm and they readily leave your firm. So the higher turnover is also kind of risk. Then there is a technology risk. Rapidly changing cost-efficient technologies are available there. You might be using some outdated technology, so that has some huge cost implications. So the latest technologies, they might be cheaper and they might be efficient as well. And then there is process risk, that obsolete processes are being adopted. For example, in case of a manufacturing firm, an obsolete machine is used to manufacture the product, whereas the new machines, which are not that expensive, but they can produce efficiently, they can produce more number of units, and the quality of those units is also good. So this is a process risk. And in case of legal and regulatory risk, this is a risk that, for example, the interest rates may be changed by the government. For example, for an importer of the car, the condition is that 3 years old car can be imported at the moment, but the government may change the regulation and relax the 3 years to 5 years. So in that case, there are huge cost implications. Now if we look at the balance sheet of the financial institutions, we will find the asset side, the banking portfolio and trading portfolio. And in Islamic banking system, we have a unique kind of risk. Now let me show you what is the Islamic banking model in case of their balance sheets. So in typical Islamic banking model, there is one tier mudarba with multiple investment tools. There is one tier mudarba, that is the bank has the deposits from the depositors, and with the depositors the bank has a relationship of a mudarib. So the depositors, they invest into the bank and they provide their capital to the bank as a mudarib. So that is known as the first tier mudarba, and that fund is used in different financing modes. Maybe for ijara purpose, murabha purpose, mudarba, musharka, or different investment modes are there. And on the liability side, we will see there are savings and investment accounts. These are the amounts which are deposited, and they are the liabilities on part of the bank. And against these deposits, the nature of contract is mudarba, as I mentioned earlier. And there are demand deposits, which are also liability for the bank. Just like the current accounts in the conventional banks, you can withdraw at any time, but you don't earn any interest on it. So the same way, if you have any demand deposits in Islamic bank, so these are in fact the Qarz-e Hasana, which the provider of the Qarz-e Hasana, which is the depositor, can take out, can withdraw the deposit at any time. And on the asset side, there is fixed income asset based on Murabha, installment sale, Istisna, Salam, and Ijara. So these are the fixed income assets. Bank, with the capital provided by the depositors, enters into different business ventures based on Murabha, Musharka, Mudarba. So if there are fixed income assets, so in case of Murabha, asset is purchased and it is sold at cost plus profit. And the installment sales, the asset is sold on the basis of installment. And in case of Istisna, the asset is going to be received after some time and the price is paid. Now the bank is owner of that asset. And then in case of Salam, price is paid for a future delivery of the commodities. Again, an asset is purchased. And in case of Ijara as well, bank as a lessor owns that asset. And there are variable income assets in case of Mudarba and Musharka. When the bank becomes partner with the other partners to engage any business into any business activity, and they earn different levels of returns. So the assets of that partnership, they have variable income and they are called variable income assets. Now what is unique in case of Islamic bank's risk? So first of all, the contractual nature of deposits. We have profit sharing investment accounts in case of Mudarba contracts. Like if the deposits are used for some investment purposes, then we have the profit sharing investment accounts and there is a Mudarba contract. And in case of demand deposits, it is Qarz-e Hasana, and there is fiduciary or trust risk between the profit sharing investment account and fiduciary contracts. So the low rate of return that conventional banks are non-compliance with Sharia can be interpreted as breach of contract. This is known as fiduciary risk. So if the Islamic banks, they provide returns lower than the rates being provided by the conventional banks, they might switch from the Islamic bank towards the conventional bank. So to remain competitive, Islamic banks try to provide higher risks, maybe higher than the conventional banks' interest rates. So the lower return might have the risk that the withdrawal risk, that is, the depositors, they may withdraw their funds and they may switch their investments. So low return may lead to withdrawal of deposits, and to avoid such situation, the returns from shareholders are transferred to depositors. Now the risk is transferred from the depositors to the shareholders. The shareholders, they are not paid for their dividends. Those dividends, they are paid to the depositors to avoid a situation that depositors may withdraw their deposits. So in this situation, the risk is transferred from depositors to the shareholders, because the shareholders, if they are not paid dividend, they might sell their investments and the share price might fall down. And using profit sharing investment as capital, and there is a difference between restricted and unrestricted profit sharing investment accounts. And in case of capital, which is provided by the depositors, in case of profit sharing investment accounts, the banks, they must take care of restricted and unrestricted profit sharing accounts. There might be some restrictions for certain deposits. There may not be some restrictions and non-restrictions. So based on that, the bank has to use the capital being provided by the depositors. And the risks in Islamic financial instruments, as modes are asset-backed or equity-based, market risk is important along with credit risk. So the Islamic banks, they invest into assets, they invest into stocks. So their holdings are, their ownerships are mostly the assets and the equity stocks. So it has a market risk. If in the market the prices may go up, the prices may go down. There is a risk of capital loss at all the time. And market and credit risk intermingle and transform from one kind to another at different stages of the transaction. At the beginning, if it is a market risk, maybe in the next stage it goes to become a credit risk. For example, in case of Murabha, an asset is purchased and bank becomes the owner of that asset. There is a market risk for the bank. When that asset is sold to the client and the cash proceeds or the installments or the price is due from the client, so in that case there is a credit risk. So for one transaction at different phases, the nature of risk is different. And the operational risk, person risk, that lack of qualified human resource who understand or who can understand or manage risk in Islamic bank. Maybe the person, they may not be able to predict the situations, or they may not be able to explain the right situation, because the lack of qualified human resource is one of the problems Islamic banks they are facing at the moment. And then there are technology risks. At the moment, they are not specific softwares which are designed only for the Islamic banking operations. Islamic banks normally they borrow the software from the conventional system and they are using the same with certain modifications. And there are some legal restrictions, legal risks also there, like standardization of the contracts, lack of legislative act and enforcement institutions. So this was our today's lecture. In this lecture, we had the concept of risk, what is risk actually, and how the risk we face in the financial operations, and also the objectives of risk management. Why do we manage the risk? And also the classification of the risk into the business or financial risk, and also systematic and unsystematic risk, which were controllable and non-controllable, and the risks faced by the financial institutions, what type of risk financial institutions they are facing, and the Islamic banking model, how the assets and liabilities are different from the conventional banking balance sheets, and what are the uniqueness or what is the difference of the risks for the Islamic banks. The uniqueness is that at different levels of their operations, the risk changes its nature. So this was all about our today's lecture. See you inshallah in the next lecture. Till then, Assalamu alaikum.